I'm Dr. Jacqueline Douge, and welcome to What is Black, a podcast that focuses on issues important to raising healthy and thriving Black children and adolescents. I created this platform because our children need to know that they matter, they are loved, and they are seen. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode. I am so excited to continue this month focusing on youth activism, youth voice, and how we can really help make this space for our youth. Last week's episode focused on youth activism. This week, I love books. I'm focused on my guest today, I should say, is Mahogany L. Browne. She's an artist, poet, activist, educator, organizer, writer, and she has authored 3 wonderful books for young people. One, Woke, a Young Poet's Call to Justice. You'll hear an excerpt. You'll hear one of the poems from that book during our interview today. Black Girl Magic, a poem by Mahogany L. Browne, and Woke Baby. 3 wonderful books that sort of help parents start very early, inspiring our children. We'll talk about the power of poetry, her work using poetry to help kids and really help affirm young women and Black and brown children in general. We'll also hear an excerpt from her upcoming book, Chlorine Sky, which is also inspiring, and it definitely inspired me. So I think you're going to love this episode, and I can't wait to hear your feedback. So let's get started. Welcome, Mahogany, to this episode of What is Black podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, excited to have you. So my first question for you is, so you're a poet and a writer. And what I wanted to know is, what does being a poet, writer, and artist mean to you at this time in history?
Being a poet and a writer in this day and time, I'm not sure it's much different than before. It means telling the truth. It means archiving history correctly, because we know what happens when we let others tell our stories. And it means being okay with the uncomfortable task of holding the hurt. And not that it is the thing that I thought I would be doing. By no means had I been prepared to be this kind of enraged all the time. I do believe now that I'm quite lucky to have the skill set to be able to articulate what we see every day, and some of us don't have the words for, the vocabulary for, the verbiage for, but we feel it in our bones. So I'm happy. I'm happy that I have the task now, and this position. So it means being prepared. It means being prepared to not just keep it honest, but to keep it accessible.
So let's get into the discussion of your books, and I really would love to dive into more about how this presence that you have, right? This almost becoming a vessel, right, for what's happening, right, in our history, feelings, right, and you pour that into the books. So I had the opportunity to read and review 3 of your books: Black Girl Magic, Woke Baby, and Woke, a Young Poet's Call to Justice. Mm-hmm. And if you could talk about, one, the progression of the ideas for encouraging and acknowledging the voices and gifts of children, and then also that special gift that you have of being this poet and writer, what that brings to these books.
So when I think about what I'm talking about now with young people, specifically Black Girl Magic and Woke, a Young Poet's Call to Justice, those 2 specifically are things that I wish I had heard or someone had talked to me about. I fell very much in love with books at a young age, but it was very difficult to find writers that looked like me, that sounded like, the families I come from, or even the neighborhoods that I come from. So I wanted those 2 in particular to be the blueprint, for finding your way out of some of that chaos that can consume you, that can make you feel like you are alone and isolated because you don't necessarily feel completely understood. In regards to Woke Baby, that was my first shot at writing a a child's poem, a poem for children. And what was most important was that the cover reflect a young black and brown baby, because it's even going, baby shower shopping now. It's so few and far between when I can find gifts before where the books look like the parents, right? So I wanted to make sure that book was Woke Baby was a part of the lineage of the Eloise Greenfield's Honey I Love. And so that was really important for me when thinking about creating those images and those stories with those voices. How the poetry is working for me now, when talking about it, I feel like it's such a magnificent tool, and it's so underused. And people forget the power of poetry. More times than not, they forget the power of art. Learning happens in so many ways, and poetry is just another way of teaching. Why I turn to it often, and I've been teaching in public schools, group homes, prison facilities since 2001. What I've learned is that because the rules are so loose, yeah, the rules are loose when talking in poem, and there are always ways to reimagine. So you can actually, have a poem that exists in a certain form, and you get to rearrange it and create something new. And that's just so empowering for young people, to come to an educational space and find out that they too can be the teachers in that moment.
So I want to go back a little bit to your discussion of Woke Baby and this wanting to create something that is accessible, especially for young, for definitely for younger children. And I wanted to share with you. So I'm a pediatrician and been working with colleagues to try to figure out, like, how do we diversify some of the book recommendations that we give as pediatricians, because many pediatricians offices,
Mm-hmm.
we participate in a program called Reach Out and Read that encourages early childhood literacy. But we know from research that books that have kids that represent them, right, are written by authors, and kids can see themselves in those books, in the books that they read, that is not only about literacy, it's about building character, it's about building a sense of who you are, right, and centering yourself. So I just wanted to say that your book has been so vital in creating that canon of diverse and inclusive literature for very small kids, right? Because there are very few board books that have babies, right, and are written by Black authors. So thank you for your work.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
So it's definitely on a lot of people's radar now, as pediatricians are trying to help parents navigate this issue of racism. And because we know racism impacts health, right? It causes stress. It causes, it can lead to chronic diseases. And for many communities of color, especially Black folk, we suffer disproportionately from a lot of diseases. And reading, it's amazing how reading and starting with books that create to affirm you can help, really help make a difference. So thank you for what you do.
Thanks. Oh, that's so good.
The other question I had about, you brought up the use of poetry in education, right? To teach in the areas that you teach, right? Young people, older people. I was wondering, do you think that poetry is such a great tool? I was just thinking for a couple reasons. One, the white space, right? And then secondly, the rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
If those are also if those make them excellent tools for teaching and engaging young people.
I think the white space is definitely helpful because it isn't as daunting, right? The text doesn't loom over you. Rhythm, I used to think rhythm was the easiest thing. And then I realized breaking the rules was the easiest thing, because some don't have the capacity to catch rhythm, let alone create it. But what you can allow the author to come to terms with is that because you can create a form or you can follow the form, one or the other, right? If you want to make something that rhymes, you're so welcome to. And if you want to say not rhyme, that too is okay. Like the flexibility in the form is what I found to be the most useful, because you have a lot of young people that are used to folks telling them no, not only telling them no, but telling them to be quiet. And here you are in this one little this so-called little form, seemingly little, and it's giving them the power to do everything that society is asked them not to do. And how magical it is to witness a young person find their voice, and it's through poetry, honestly, that I've witnessed the most miraculous risings from these young people that become poet laureates, that become professors themselves, that become, writers for the governor. Like writing with young people has ultimately changed my landscape forever, because I know that everything is possible. Everything is possible. Poetry teaches, it teaches community building. It teaches, public speaking. It teaches confidence. It teaches debate. Like you have to be able to stand by what you're saying. And even if the poem is a piece of fiction, right? If it's flash fiction, if it's an iteration of a dream, you're able to articulate what that means and what it stands for. And just having these young theorists come into themselves through this form has really been life changing for me as well.
And I'm wondering, because of all the things you're saying about poetry, there's so many, well, I think it's many, right? Authors of color that have foundations in poetry.
Hmm.
And I wonder why that is. And just, I guess, maybe hearing you discuss the power of poetry and how it can transform, right, and really engage people. Maybe that's why many successful authors have roots in poetry.
I think so. I think there's something to be said. This could be a study all in its own, because it starts off short, right? It can be a haiku, it could be a senri, it can be a sonnet, it can be one page, it can be several. You can invest a little bit of time into the page and not necessarily walk away feeling like if that page isn't accepted somewhere, then the whole story is gone. You can edit and recreate. Whereas I think novels are much more daunting, and they require much more, not necessarily focus, but like the time invested in writing a novel is different than writing a poem. Now, not talking about poem collections or poetry books, but I'm talking about the poem and the page, the one page. I think that has a lot to do with these amazing authors that come from the lineage of poetry. You have to have a way with words, you have to be able to touch the soul. And a lot of people, their poems are okay. No shade, but some people's poems are poems. They're like, yes, that is the correct form. You did it correct. But there's something to be said about the soul in a poem. And some of our best writers understand that component, and they're able to transfer that kind of energy into these really, great American novels.
So I want to transition or bridge a little bit. I've read that hip hop has influenced your poetry and writing. So I
Hmm.
wanted to delve into a little bit about how that how if that's one, if that's true,
Okay.
and then secondly, how has hip hop influenced it?
Okay, I'm gonna do the abridged version. I definitely am a child of hip hop. However, my beginnings as a writer was not through poetry. What was it, junior year of high school, my AP Lit teacher told me that my poem was incorrect. And again, you hear me talking about how there is no wrong way to write a poem. Like there's different ways to write poems, but like if you can explain your reasoning behind it, then there is always a way for a new form to be created. But when you think about the traditional canon of poetry, it wasn't being taught that way before. And my love for poetry came and went in a series of 2 weeks when I was in a junior year in high school. And my AP Lit teacher had told me we had to remix a classic, and my classic was Dante's Inferno. I decided I'm going to remix Dante's Inferno with NWA lyrics. I thought that made sense. I was really excited. She was highly unimpressed and told me that if I didn't do it over, she was going to fail me. So I said, "Oh, then this is exactly not what self-expression is. And I hate this class now, right? I didn't do any poetry again until I was 21. Up until 21, I was still writing for the newspaper and things like that. But what brought me to New York in the first place was me writing for hip hop magazines and freelancing for Honey and Source and interning at Double XL. And so hip hop journalism was is a large part of my DNA. And I say is because it's still, you can still hear those rhythms when I'm reading certain poems. Like I always have a cadence that definitely is following a soundtrack somewhere from either, I don't know, NWA or Too Short to Little Kim. Those were the voices that brought me to myself. Even before I understood that some of it would be the thing that I would rage against in my poems now. So that's the short answer. Hip hop has long been a part of my life and still is.
I can definitely feel that in how you speak. You know, when you do your spoken word poetry. So I just found that fascinating because I mean I was thinking about the movie with Sanaa Lathan. Was it
Brown
Brown
sugar.
Sugar? Brown
Yeah.
Sugar. And
When
she's
did you
like,
fall in love with hip hop?
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I had reminiscences of that.
That's
I'm
okay. I like that movie. That was a good one.
Now I wanted to move on to a couple of quotes from, there was a recent article from We Need Diverse Books written by Ariel Vinso. It was titled How Children's Authors Create Change Outside of Their Books.
Mm-hmm.
And so the two quotes that I took from the article were, the first one was, for me, using my art to respond to the things that impact my community is a way of life. It is a tool for remembering and honoring. It also is a war cry.
Mm-hmm.
You then said, Audre Lorde vowed, our silence will not save us. I take that seriously because I've seen what happens when more than one voice speaks up for what is right. I've seen what can change when more than one city block responds to injustice. And then the follow-up quote from that article was, I want to see the stories that move my blood, not just traditional ones in the so-called canon. Centering Black voices, femme protagonists, and children of the hip-hop lineage is my focus. This is an act of revolution too.
Mm-hmm.
So my question was, has your motivation to write always been about making a difference, or has it evolved over time?
I think it's evolved. Before I was writing because I was told to shut up, right? So like I was like told because I was a girl I need to be quiet. Because I was Black I need to be quiet. Because I was a child I need to be quiet. And so poetry and writing became the one way in which no one got to tell me to shut up. Right. And I did not understand that that was a metaphor for the rest of my life. I didn't realize the, how those two informed each other until later. And then I was like, oh, so if you tell me to be quiet before I get to this age, then these are the ways in which I'm more of a consumer rather than an owner. These are the ways in which I'm more of a follower rather than a leader. These are the ways in which I don't challenge a broken system and I just go along because it's easier for the powers that be. So I did not realize at the beginning that that was my purpose. I just knew I had to say something. I had to tell my story. I had to tell the truth. And I also had to tell my grandmother's story because there were so many moments where my grandmother, my mother, even my great grandmother, now that I'm learning that these matriarchs, their story was told by people who weren't them, and their opinions were given to them, or their silence, if they were silenced. There was a formula to learning what they really felt, and it rarely came from these history books. So that became my charge. Over time, it evolved because I recognized the power of archive, and I recognized the power of the page, and I recognized that if not me, then who, right? So I think over time, I did realize how those numbers added up. But in the beginning, I definitely was just trying to get free, personally free. I didn't know my liberation could liberate so many others.
And what you're saying, really does, does really speak to me, because as you were talking about your family history, right? This matriarchal history. I thought, I was thinking about my history, right? My mom won't share anything past a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's because of trauma, right? And probably because she had to be silent, right? There was no way for her, and I don't think she had the means to write it, right? She couldn't speak it, so she packed it down. And so I don't have that, so that history isn't shared.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you. I think it is liberating, right? When you can tell your story, struggle, you know, opportunity, greatness, the whole spectrum. So I love that you found that in you. But I'm just wondering who helped you cultivate that,
Mm-hmm.
and then potentially could there be lessons for parents, right? How can parents make sure that we can really allow our children to have voice
Mm-hmm.
so that they can heal and make a difference?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for that. I think my mother, my grandmother, they gave me books to read. That was my escape. And that gave me the power to consider myself as a writer later. But now, in this day and age, I wish I would have found an Urban Word or a Youth Speaks or any of these youth literary organizations that's where I was teaching since 2003, and I'm now the artistic director. So like I wish those spaces existed for me, where it was just an after school program that you can go and work on your ideas with other like-minded folks. And you also got to be in a space that championed you being on stage, or champion you writing this book, or champion you writing this article. It was really all about the word, and the youth voice, um, having something to say, and being able to speak for themselves. So I wish I had that then, and now that it exists, I would tell every parent from here, to wherever, like this is the way. This is the wave. And if you just take a young person to a poetry slam, or take a young person to a open mic, or take a young person to a youth literary conference, you will see the magnitude of what can happen. Now, they may not all be poets, or they may not all be like poets who want to perform, but they will find their tribe, right? They will find a way to stand out and speak up for themselves, even if it's just, okay, I don't want to read poems, but I can edit, or I can help this person practice. Like every community requires different positions, just like the revolution, just like the protest. There is no one way to get to the revolution. Everybody can't be on the protest line. Who's watching the kids? Who's making sure that we have bail money after the protest goes awry? Who's making sure that the correct information is getting out? Everybody has a position to play, and the same way goes with poetry.
Awesome. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind reading one of your poems.
Hmm.
There was one from Woka Young Poets Call to Justice.
Hmm. Which one would you like to hear?
Um, there was actually one I originally wanted you to speak to talk about, but there was one that just so resonated with me, and I have the book and I'm just looking at it right now.
Isn't this a pretty book? I love this book.
This is
Not the
beautiful, and
best.
I love, yeah, and the fact that you have three different authors, poets, Elizabeth Acevedo
Hmm.
and Olivia Godwood
Hmm.
joined you, and then you have a forward by Jason Reynolds, and you want to talk about like powerhouse poets, right? You
Right,
like
right, right.
it's all stacked here. It's like,
And what's amazing is all of these poets were like, Jason was a younger poet when I met him. I met him before his first YA book. I met him when he was doing poetry in New York. Olivia Gatwood, I met her as a youth poet at the International Youth Poetry Festival. She was representing Albuquerque. She might have been 15 or 16. And I met Elizabeth Acevedo at Urban Word NYC. I was a mentor there when she was on the slam team. So all of these people in this book come from youth poetry, which is like such, the chef's kiss. It's like the cherry on top.
The poet's pen stuck out for me, especially given the prior question.
I
So
could
I
read
think we
that.
can do the poet's pen.
I could do that. The poet's pen. What does the silence of a people sound like? Maybe the silence you hold in your chest, the silence before a body falls to the ground, the silence after a cry pierces the air, the silence when listening for a newborn's breath. Or does it sound like an orchid growing toward the sun? Does it sound like a moon moving above the crashing waters? Does it sound like a poet and the poet's pen, moving against the paper, speaking stories about their home city and a single mother's song? Moving against the paper, speaking stories about farming and a father's well wishes or a graduation ceremony. Moving against the paper, speaking stories about bicycle spokes and trading cards clicking hello to passersby. A silence can sound like many things. That is why we choose to write poems as a people's almanac for those unable to speak.
Oh man, I have the goosebumps. Okay. So again, I think this does really, speak to, how we started out, how um you have this power, right, but as an artist, poet, writer, right, to really capture history.
Mhm.
And I saw a quote that you had on Instagram and Twitter. You said in that quote, or wrote in the quote, poems tell us about a history that is often erased or ignored.
Mhm.
And it was after reading that poem that it really clicked for me, right? This power that you have to document and examine history that a lot of other art forms or types of writing don't really allow us to do, right? Or allow a reader to take in and understand.
Mhm. Mhm. I do. Yeah, I do remember that quote. Had it not been for Sonia Sanchez and Amiri Baraka, um, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, um, Nikki Giovanni, and so many others from the Black arts movement, I wonder what we would think, what we would know, how we would remember Asada and Angela. You know what I mean? Like there are autobiographies that exist that tell us what was happening. But those poems also are a punctuation. They're an exclamation point. They are a comma. They are adding to the historical essays and autobiographies that have been written. Who wrote that poem? I have to think. It's on the tip of my tongue, but like there's a beautiful poem. I think it was Nikki no, it was Sister Sonia Sanchez. I think she wrote about was it Aretha? And I just thought, wow, like here you have, this is a form of ekphrastic, right? Where the art is responding to the art. The artist is responding to the artist. And I love that moment where the fourth wall is brought down and you get to see how art informs other art, and not just art informs other art, but people inform communities, inform tradition, right? So like I love that, and I can't imagine who I would be now without those pieces existing.
To your point that, there are many biographies written by our wonderful leaders and artists. But again, sometimes those books are very didactic, right? She lived here,
Mhm.
she died here, right? And it's just very chunky.
Mhm.
And I think with the power of poetry, you know, again, you talk about a cadence, you talk about, like, to me, there's movement,
Mhm.
right? If it's done well, so
Mhm.
that you can, you, in the mood of a poem can match maybe that point in time that artist is writing about that other artist.
Mhm.
So it's like a give and take. So which I love.
Yeah, and it was a poem for Aretha by Nikki Giovanni. It was Giovanni that did that one.
Awesome, awesome.
And it does add color. It does. It adds this, because biographies, they're I don't want to say clinical, right? But they're matter of fact. More times than not, it's like this happened, this happened, this happened. Whereas the poetry, it brings in the human senses sometimes that we eliminate from articles, and we eliminate from certain kinds of writing. And so those senses are returned to us through poetry. So you can smell what was cooking when that Aretha song played, and you can hear Aretha's voice, and you can see the reaction of Aretha's voice on the bodies in the room, right? You can, I mean, it's all so, it feels like an out of body experience.
Yeah, and as you're talking about that, right? I'm starting to envision like the music, right? Especially with we're talking about Aretha Franklin. I hear the music, right?
Mm.
You even speak as, I mean, you could tell you're a poet, right? Because even the way you speak and answer questions, it's like, oh man, this is intriguing. So, which is cool.
That is trippy, and I love it. Yes. And the
So
other
you
one
were,
that I was thinking of was the elegy that Sister Sonia Sanchez did for Billie Holiday. So
oh wow,
you have
okay,
those,
so
like, it's just so rich, right? It's just so rich. The culture is already rich as is, but you have those moments where it's just, you can't contain it. Like how you feel goosebumps when you hear the thing. It can be church. It can be sister talk in the kitchen. It can be, an Oprah moment. There are moments when the truth hits you, and the body responds chemically. And these are the poets and the poems that I think they build that bridge for the human connection.
so I'm going to rip off a little bit of your idea of building a bridge.
Hmm.
So not only do you write, you founded the Woke Baby Book Fair.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if you could share information about why it was important for you to create that book fair and what it does for people that participate.
Woke Baby Book Fair was my response to missing my scholastic book fairs when I was in grade school. It was like, I remember those little magazines coming out, me going home and picking out all the stories that I wanted, and my mom saying, okay, you have 20, you get two, right? But I wanted to do it slightly different because that still exists. And I wanted to make sure that there was just a place for a discussion about diverse books and authors, and equitable discussions with these authors, and inclusion, because I don't remember, like I said, I don't remember seeing myself often. And so that is, there's these checkbox that I have to make sure are accounted for when considering books. They need to be pushing the page. They need to be pushing ideas. They need to be informing and educating, our revolutionaries of tomorrow. It can't just, I mean, I'm here for, books about counting. All of that stuff is amazing. And there is a place for them. It always has been. But it's a rarity that you can find over 20 books in one space that is talking about the different ways in which you raise your child to be a critical thinker, to be a global citizen. And that's what Woke Baby is.
Oh man, so I'm down for that. So I mean I think that's a wonderful purpose and goal for books, and again it to me it just expands the power, right? As long as these books are accessible to kids, and it sounds like you're making them accessible. So hopefully in 2021, we'll continue to see more. I know given the pandemic, everything sort of kind of changed, but
Yeah.
are you hoping for 2021 that you'll be able to have the book fair again, or
Will
finding
happen
ways to do it
again.
virtually?
Yeah, it'll just happen in a different capacity. But it will happen again because the literature doesn't stop, and the movement doesn't stop. So we just have to respond to what the time requires. But the time is always now. So we'll be back.
Before we wrap up, I did want to have you have the opportunity, if you can, share a sneak peek of your upcoming novel, Chlorine Sky.
Yes, I'm so excited. Okay. So Chlorine Sky is this coming of age novel in verse about a young Black girl growing up, dealing with colorism, dealing with first friendship fractures, dealing with what does consent mean, dealing with gender norms, um, and all through the means of it's all tied up through her love for basketball and swimming. So I think I'm going to read this part here. Yes, okay. After fourth grade, I learned you think you so smart is a threat. In high school, without no daddy to show me how to dribble or pivot, with a sister who act like she hate me and a cousin who more sister than cousin, I figure I'm safer if I stay away from light. Ain't no daddy to say move right, right, left. Mama worked for everyone so I don't hold my breath. Just stay away from the spotlight. The light gets too hot for brown girls like me to feel safe. This is when I learned to play not as smart. This is when I learned to keep my hands in my lap during Mr. Wakobe's class. This is when I learned to not run as fast. This is when I stopped beating the boys in running and kickball and tetherball and t-ball. This is how I learned to play not as big, 'cause nobody got time for a girl outshining them. My big cousin Inga says, "Who you playing small for?" And I pretend I don't know what she's talking about. She's 5'11" and the tallest woman in our family. She's a basketball coach for the little kid league during summer. And after she saw I had handles in fourth grade, she ain't let me drop the rock since. Who you playing small for means I don't get to slink into the corner. I don't get to find a home in the shadow, not when there is a court nearby. Just a little
Oh,
bit. Just a little
oh
bit.
man, I started tearing up with that
Oh,
question, like who you playing small for?
mm, mm,
Because it speaks to me, right? It says, that a lot of times, even as black women and mothers, right, we don't model this for our children, and then and they ask those questions if they may not even be able to articulate it, right, but how they may show up in the world or act
mm,
so that they have to stay small or stay little because they don't see us being our beautiful selves, right?
mhm, mhm,
And how wonderful we are. And I love the fact that she has someone older, an older role model, right, to speak those words to her and really shake her up and say, look, you know what? And asking that question, I want you to understand how you have the power, you have the beauty, you should shine. Oh, I love it. I love
mm.
it. And I haven't even read the whole book. Oh man. Oh, that's beautiful. Because again, I think, I think that I fall into that trap, right?
Yeah,
That, it's like, why am I dimming? And I have a colleague, we spoke the other day, and she said those same, not the exact words, but sort of the similar words, like, why are you dimming your light for somebody else?
absolutely. I think I mean, we've been taught that this is the way, if you take up too much space, then who will want you? And as a woman, right, as a female, a feminine, whatever you want to call it, when you are growing up girl, you are constantly reminded that you can never take up too much space. But as a black woman, you ain't supposed to take up no space. Like, you really are supposed to be in the shadows. Like, your job is to just help whoever needs you, and that's it. Like, you at best, your name will be remembered for helping someone do something. At best, right? So yeah, it's
Or
definitely
not remembered at all, right? So we're talking about at the,
true.
at the time we're recording this, right? Breonna Taylor,
Mm,
her name is out there, right? But
hmm hmm
she took up too much space, right? Her case took up too much space.
and not even that, they decided that she didn't deserve to even be recognized. We're recognizing the harm done to her, and they're recognizing the harm done to her neighbor's wall.
Yeah.
How despicable. Like, what are you like? If you think about the kind of interrogation that must happen in a young black girl's mind after that happens, what are you trying to say to them? You like, what are you reminding them? What are you who are they not to be after that? What can we become knowing that this is what the country thinks of us? It's so dangerous and reckless and infuriating. So yeah, you're right on all fronts. On all fronts. I mean, just, the black existence is just so disregarded in this country. It makes me pause. Like, what am I writing these poems for? Why am I fighting? But I know better, right? I know that the idea is to distract me. The idea is to damage, destroy, but we will remain focused. And we may not see the justice that we deserve to see. Brianna didn't see it. And bless that Brianna's law exists, and bless her mother Tamika for like keeping her name ever present with all of the work that they're doing in the forefront. But it is going to require us to steadfast, because we can't let it happen again. They got to know that this can't happen again. And it is not just your job that is at stake, right? Our safety's at stake. Like, our lives are at stake, and we're still willing to speak up, and we have to keep it up. We can't stop.
And I think, again, it goes back to, my first question, right? That role that you have, right? The power that you have as a poet and a writer, an activist, an artist, that will make all the difference in the world, because a child, an adult reads your words, right? And can find solace, can find hope, can find themselves, or reimagine themselves when the world tells them that they don't matter, they don't exist. But in your words, they do exist, right? They're seen, which I think is such a wonderful gift.
Thank you. Agreed.
So how can our listeners learn more about all your wonderful work, books, and where you might be speaking next?
I am Mo Browne everywhere. MOBROWNE. That's on Instagram, on Twitter. Chlorine Sky. There's a little excerpt that exists out in the world with me reading it. You can see that on Refinery 29, or you can go to the site created just for Chlorine Sky, which is Mahogany L, Browne with an E at the end of Browne. And if you go to my IG, you'll see I literally think I'm performing every other day this week. We still these poems are gonna happen, because they are bomb, and I will never pretend that the healing properties of art and community haven't saved me time and time again. So I am a servant to it, and I'm so glad. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. And this has been, I think it's definitely important to find community and to speak hope and love and prosperity. And I think you do that. And I wish you all the success, and wellness and peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And I want to again extend a special thank you to our special guest for this episode, Mahogany L. Browne. I just thought she would be a great addition. So sort of like a bonus / extra episode for this month. Typically we're biweekly, but I couldn't resist adding this conversation to this month's discussion about anti-racism, youth activism, and really creating spaces for kids to learn about themselves and again, be affirmed and to help them thrive. So she really inspired me, and I hope that she inspired you through this conversation. And then you reach out to get her books, because I think they're awesome. Even as an adult, I found them inspirational, especially Black Girl Magic, and all of her work really is inspiring. So again, thank you for listening. And as always, I'd like to encourage you to rate and review us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to hear what you think about the podcast, because that really helps us create more content, and also informs us on how well we're doing, because I always love the feedback. In addition, please don't forget to we do have a newsletter, so you can sign up for our newsletter at www.whatisblack.co. And again, we'd love to hear from you via our social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So I can't wait to hear from you. And until next time. And also, it's still October. We have a few more weeks to go. So if you haven't registered to vote, please register to vote based on your state. So hopefully the deadlines have been passed in your state. If they haven't, please register to vote. and have a plan to vote. So vote early and with a friend. And until next time.